we're also protesting against the fact that the Prime Minister, who in 2008 was crying out loud against Prime Minister at the time, Olmert, saying that the fact that he's being investigated means that he can no longer manage the country. Well, Netanyahu is not only investigated for years, he's charged, he had his hearings, and he's in court now. He's being tried, and instead of doing what he suggested to Olmert to do, he is standing in front of the court with a few ministers behind him, explaining to the people of Israel that we should not trust the law enforcement system, the court system, all the legal system that he managed for 14 out of the last 24 years. He was the head of this law enforcement system. We are, as ex-military people, are demanding is the fact that he has authorized Germany to sell advanced submarines to Egypt without getting any approval and any discussion with anybody from the ministries of defense. Now, for months before the last election, he's denied that he has given this approval. Then all of a sudden, in a television interview, he admitted to have done so, but he claims to have had some kind of a secret that only 3 top officials shared with him. Well, these top 3 officials have immediately denied the fact that there was any such secret and that they were part of it. So the man was lying and then lying again. And all we're saying is, if you've done nothing wrong, why are you afraid of investigation? It should be your top interest to have it investigated and clear your name.
As I briefly introduced him before the break here, we are joined in the studio by IDF Reserve Captain Guy Boran, a former Air Force pilot and a co-leader of the Air Force pilots' protests. So very relevant to have you in the studio right now. Well, first of all, I want to get your reaction to the Prime Minister's comments, to the angle that he's taking on this.
Okay, if I may just relate to, in a few words, to the former speaker presented as if facts that previous governments have done even worse changes and reforms. This is of course not true, because a policy change of left, of right, has happened before, and the Oslo Agreement, etc., but no previous government have dared to change the rules of the game, changed Israel balance between the judicial part and the Knesset. This is the only ones that do it. The second fact, which is not true, is that the majority of the people support it. Now, all the polls show that even within the Likud, even within the coalition parties, more than half reject the way that this reform is being forced. The fact that there is a need or a possibility to do reform, true. Sure. In every aspect of Israel's life, in the military, in education, in judiciary, we're not objecting to reforms. But the way that this is done is not a reform. This is a revolution. Now, regarding your question about the Prime Minister, the movement
that you're leading, yes.
Yeah, he's used the word refusal, though that's the way that you translated it. I want to make it very, very clear. No pilot has refused any order. The 37 pilots out of the 40 reservists of this very front-end, top-of-the-line squadrons have done a very simple thing. They do reserve duty, miluim,
a lot of it,
every week for a day for many years. They decided to withhold for one day this week, tomorrow, to discuss among themselves what would be the situation if this revolution happens, and what would be with them and the squadrons. This is not only their right, it's their duty to raise a red flag. Because what do you expect? You expect that after the legislation is done, and if they cannot participate anymore in the Air Force, are they supposed to wait and then afterwards say, sorry, we cannot take part? No. This is the moment for them to raise a red flag against, again, they did not refuse. Some of them might have acted in yesterday's attack in Syria.
Yeah, I mean, this is to highlight again, as you mentioned, this is the tip of the spear, these guys. And yes, some reports indicating they were, again, allegedly in the air, operating against Syria last night. I don't know if you can comment on that at all, but that's an important point to highlight here. But look, I want to bring in the critics for a minute here, who, something coming from the government here, saying that this is harms the nation's security, quote unquote. And I think you may have answered this already, but is it a success if, like, the army lays down its arms, if there's some sort of mass demonstration like that?
Yeah, first of all, we're not there. It's not even close. What it is that the risk to the security is much more by this kind of aggressive, one-sided legislation, which would cause a lot of people who think that this is not going to be a democracy anymore. This legislation is going to cause them to withhold their reserve, and this will hurt the security of Israel. Right now, those reservists that raise the red flag are not risking the security. They are participating in the reserve. They are doing all the duties. All they're doing is they are demonstrating, and they are telling the government, hold it. If you go ahead with this aggressive legislation, which in our opinion will turn Israel into a non-democratic state, we're going to have a problem to participate in the army. So this is the moment to raise this red flag, and I admire those pilots for having done so.
It's risky. Look, I want to bring another step here. Some of the other, the criticism on this, that, there should be concern, I think, for how it's perceived by the enemy. I mean, Hezbollah, for example, they're not missing this moment. They're jumping all over it. Seeing it as a moment of weakness, even, the way they're defining it. Is there concern that such a display could be perceived as weakness, could invite attacks, endanger the kids on the front lines?
Again, I think that the Hezbollah and the rest of Israel's enemies are looking at this legislation that is, and what it is causing to the country, the split, the lack of confidence in the government. This is what they're happy about. I don't think that they think for one moment that the Israeli army and air force is going to be less effective if they try to do anything. This is not the question. And by the way, Israel's defense force and the air force is not losing its capacity overnight. It's something that will not happen. What the Hezbollah and the rest of our enemies are looking at, and they said that, is the rupture in the Israeli society. This is caused by the government, not by the reservists.
Guy Perlon, I know this is a movement that will continue. I know you're set to stand your ground on this, along with the other guys who are alongside you in this. So first of all, thank you for your service. Good luck out there in the streets, obviously, facing
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you being with us.
Now, those reservists, as civilians, if they feel, and this is what they say they do, that if the legislation passes, they're going to have a problem. They're not going to be able to serve in an army of a state which is not democratic, without a strong, independent judicial system. So if they feel so, it is not only their right to raise a red flag, it's their duty to do so. They should not wait until after the legislation passes and then say, sorry, we're not going to serve. So all they did, and Shai is right, they did not refuse not only any mission, but anything, yet they're saying, and they're saying it discreetly in the Air Force. The fact that it leaked, and we know about those 37 pilots of Squadron 69, it's not because they did a press conference. It leaked. They spoke to their Air Force commander, the squadron commander, raising a red flag.
Thanks. We do have a pilot here, though he doesn't plan to take off, I understand, in any military plane today or very soon. Captain in Reserves Guy Perlon, former Israeli Air Force pilot and the co-leader of the Air Force pilots protest. Thank you very much for coming into our studio. Overnight, after Gallant was dismissed by Prime Minister Netanyahu, we saw picture after picture posted on social media of whether it is pilots or other officers from elite units putting their ranks down, saying we don't need them anymore. Are you keeping your ranks for now, or are you done with this government?
Well, you know, the group of pilots that I'm part of, which is 1,000 ex-Israeli Air Force pilots, putting our ranks down is not really the issue. But what we've expressed is a very clear support of those reservists pilots, the volunteers, that said that if this legislation passes, they will find it difficult. They're not going to be able to continue to serve in what they consider to be no more a democratic state. And we definitely support it. We're talking about hundreds. You know, at the time I was interviewed here a few weeks ago, everybody thought it was like 37 pilots of a specific squadron. But as I said then, everybody knows now that this is across the Air Force, hundreds of active reservists that will not serve if this revolution, as we see it, pass. And you can see the results of actually Gallant himself, which up until a few days ago was not considering coming to the Prime Minister and saying enough is enough. The day before yesterday, he did.
To those viewers of ours who are not sure they understand why is it that you and more than 1,000 other pilots and so many across the reserves have been voicing these concerns? What are you concerned about?
It's a very, very good point, and I'd like to make it clear because many of the coalition speakers are presenting it as if we want Bibi Netanyahu down. This is the reason why we do it. Well, I can remind your viewers that for 15 or 16 years, Netanyahu was elected. Nobody, neither the pilots nor anybody else, did such things as we do now. So this is not about Bibi Netanyahu. We served under many of his governments. And again, another claim that they have is that they were elected, and therefore, if they give up on this legislation they want to do, it means that they cannot do any kind of laws or legislation because somebody's going to protest. Well, this is not true. We're not talking about laws of politics, of right politics. As far as we're concerned, if they passed a very right-wing policy, such as annexing the territories, there would be no such step on behalf of the pilots or the other people. The thing is that they're passing laws that are changing the rules of the game. We're talking about changing the basic structure, which we consider contradicts the Declaration of Independence of Israel. Now, the reason why you see the pilots are, everybody's talking about the pilot, but as you mentioned, this goes across all the elite units and many, many soldiers, and in fact, already into not only the reservists, but the permanent army as well. The thing is that all of those people, very dedicated, have been serving all their lives, you know, now say enough is because we feel that the country is going to change its form irreversibly.
What is the opportunity here? Let's say, as expected, Netanyahu is going to halt the legislative process today, perhaps to be renewed after Passover, probably, but let's say it's halted. Where does the opportunity lie? In a constitution, in some other status quo? I mean, will Israel look the same after this for you?
Absolutely a good question. I believe that Israel is not going to look the same whichever way, whichever scenario is going to take place. But if you ask me, first of all, until it is very, very clear that this legislation stops and cancelled, not delayed by a few weeks until after the holiday, which is basically the only thing that the Minister of Defense, Gallant, said, was that he asked that it withholds for a month. But if it is totally stopped, you're right. We believe, and I believe that many, many people in Israel that are in the streets now are saying, okay, this crisis that happened should never be able to happen again. In other words, we need a change in the social order, whether it would be a constitution, which is very high expectation, but very difficult to achieve, or other arrangements. But it's not going to be enough if they cancel this judicial reform kind of legislation and everything is going to go back to normal. No, what happened, such a crisis needs to be amended in a way that would not be possible to happen again in a few months or a few years.
Please stay with us, Guy Poran. We want to take a listen to I wanted to say Yair Netanyahu, but it was Yair Lapid who spoke
long ago in late December.
Thank you. And Guy Poran, last question to you before we have to part. I'm sure your partners to the demonstrations are in Jerusalem right now. We're hearing about right-wing demonstrators, among them La Familia group that are known to be very violent, that are making their way there. How are you setting up for this?
Well, just before entering the studio, I was talking to many of my colleague pilots that are out there, and the last thing that we heard is that we've decided, the protesters, most of them, to actually not confront them in front of the Knesset and maybe have something bad ignited in terms of violence, but actually move away and let them go in there. And so a lot of our protesters, probably most of them, are departing from in front of the Knesset. And so this is interesting. And I heard of some of the groups actually crossing each other on the way from and to the Knesset and having some smiles and I wouldn't say handshakes, but there was no violence.
So this is part of what you're protecting.
Yes.
The ability of everybody to demonstrate.
Maybe the early signs of some kind of social reconciliation. We can all hope.
Captain in Reserves Guy Poran, thank you very much for coming into our studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
ואיך אפשר לדבר אחרי שירה מרגשת כזאת? ערב טוב. אני סרן במילואים גיא פורן, מייסד פורום 555 של טייסי חיל האוויר לשעבר. אני גאה לייצג יותר מ-1,300 לוחמי ולוחמות צוות אוויר לשעבר שמשתתפים במאבק נגד חוקי הדיקטטורה. רבים מהם נמצאים פה הערב. אנחנו נאבקים על כך שלא יחצה הקו האדום החמור ביותר, הקו בין ישראל דמוקרטית וליברלית לישראל דיקטטורית וחשוכה. דמוקרטיה. אני מייצג היום 1,300 טייסים וטייסות ימנים ושמאלנים שלחמו יחד למען ביטחון ישראל, שסיכנו את חייהם במלחמות ובמבצעים צבאיים מעבר לקווי האויב, וכעת עומדים כחזית אחת נגד הסכנה מבית. אני פוחד היום יותר משפחדתי ליפול בשבי האויב בזמן טיסות מבצעיות. אז הרגשתי שאני מסכן את עצמי בשביל מדינת ישראל. היום מדינת ישראל היא זו שבסכנה. מאחוריי עומדים טייסים לשעבר ומילואימניקים, אך גם יותר ויותר טייסים בשירות קבע שפונים אלינו. אסור להם להתבטא פומבית כמובן, אבל הם מודאגים, מפוחדים, ואמונתם במדינה מתערערת. בין העצורים השבוע היו גם 3 טייסי מילואים שהפגינו בצורה דמוקרטית ולא אלימה. ומי זה שהורה לעצור אותה? בן גביר, עבריין מורשע שלא שירת יום אחד בצבא, שהמפכ"ל הנוכחי הודיע שהוא האחראי לפריצת המהומות האלימות בתקופת שומר החומות, הוא מכנה אותנו אנרכיסטים. בושה, בושה, תקשיב טוב, השר לביטחון פנים. בין 1,300 טייסי חיל האוויר לשעבר שמפגינים ושחתמו על מכתב נגד חוקי ממשלת החושך שלך, יש רבים שבמלחמת יום כיפור עלו שוב ושוב על מטוסים חשופים לטילים מעל דמשק, בידיעה שיש סיכוי גדול שטיסתה תסתיים במרתפי הכלא הסורי, וחלקם אף הגיעו לשם. אז אתה חושב שחדרי המעצר שלך מפחידים אותנו? בושה! 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 אבל אני רוצה לומר לאלפי השוטרים והשוטרות שעושים את עבודתם, אתם האחים שלנו. לכולנו מטרה משותפת שהיא שמירה על ישראל כמדינת חוק דמוקרטית. לכן נמשיך להקפיד על מחאות לא אלימות. זו המלחמה החשובה בתולדות ישראל, המלחמה על הדמוקרטיה. אנחנו נילחם בכל הכוח ונעשה כל מה שצריך כדי לנצח בה. תודה רבה. אני רוצה להזמין לבמה את תת-אלוף במילואים, דוקטור רועי אלקבץ, יוזם ומוביל מחאת השריונרים.